It has to be said that there is nothing subtle about the way we celebrate Easter here at Trinity Church. We pull out every stop we have. We use every flower we can find, every trumpet we can hire, every great hymn we can pack into the service. All of that to proclaim the Easter news that Christ is risen. There's nothing quite like the high spirits of Easter Day. But then it's back to the routines. All the old problems and worries of our world we faced before Easter are, lo and behold, still there. We have proclaimed that Christ is risen, but so much around us seems so sadly unresurrected. Despite what Easter proclaimed, it doesn't look like sin and death have actually been conquered. The nickname for this day is Low Sunday. From the sense that energy is low compared to last week, it probably is. The crowds are somewhat smaller, they probably are. And in many ways, we're left wondering, what did it all mean? After all the celebration, it's natural to be asking questions such as, can I really believe that this man came back from the dead? Isn't it fair for us skeptical 21st century Christians to be at least a little doubtful of that great Easter proclamation? Isn't it fair to ask, if Christ is risen, what difference does it make? The first thing to be said is that questions and doubts in church are nothing to be embarrassed about. Doubt is an essential part of faith. In fact, the opposite of faith is not doubt, but certainty. Faith always contains within it an element of uncertainty, of risk, of unknowing. Think for a moment. We assume we live with certitudes in every area of our life except our religion, but in fact, every part of our lives is built on faith and trust, not certainty. Scientists depend continually on assumptions that they cannot prove, on theories that seem useful but can't be validated. Whenever in school science class you learned about E equals mc squared, you had to take it on faith. The faith that people you trusted had come to find it trustworthy, even though they themselves may have not observed the validity of it at all. They had to take it on faith. And of course, all relationships are based on faith. I can't prove to my children that I will be faithful to them, or my parents, or my friends, or my spouse. They have to trust me, and I have to trust them. Doubts are possible. Nothing can be proven. It requires faith. All knowing, all living, all relating depend on faith and risk. And that means that doubt is built into our lives because doubt is the acknowledgement that we are finite creatures who know only partially. The wise preacher and novelist Frederick Buechner once imagined what would happen if God did decide to be absolutely clear about his existence so there could be no doubt. So Buechner imagines he would take the stars of the Milky Way in the night sky, brighten them up a good bit, and rearrange them so that one night the world could step outside and look at the heavens and see not the usual scattering of stars everywhere, but written in the heavens, I really exist. What would happen, he says? Well, churches would fill up rapidly. They might need to hire football stadiums for the people who want to get in touch. Crime might cease, wars might suddenly stop, and there might be a deep hush across the world. But how long would that really last, that little bit of certainty? What difference would it make? What we really want in our deepest need, Buechner wrote, is not proof that there is a God somewhere who exists, or even scientific evidence that a resurrection happened long ago. What we need is a God who is right here, knee-deep in the mud and mire of human existence, a risen Christ who comes to us, bringing life and hope. The gospel lesson we listened to this morning is, of course, the study of doubting Thomas, the one among all the disciples who is recorded as refusing to believe the news of the resurrection. The church has us read this passage every year on this Sunday as a reminder that even the disciples and the people in the early church had doubts and questions about the resurrection. It was too huge to take down simply. Thomas had been absent the night the risen Lord appeared to the disciples in the upper room, and when he heard his friend's report, he wasn't buying it. Now, wait a minute, it was as if he was saying, let's go through this. We put Jesus in a tomb. He was dead, D-E-A-D, dead. Please, this has been hard enough. Let's not play games about people being risen. Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. That's Thomas, our friend, skeptical, rational, demanding proof he can put his hands on, asking questions. We can often feel acutely how difficult it is for us 2,000 years later actually to believe in the resurrection, despite the simple wild scandal of the claim. After all, we seem only to be left with these strange, elusive accounts of the disciples meeting their Lord. An empty tomb, an upper room, some people walking along a dusty road to Emmaus or sitting out on a beach. And it's difficult to reconcile the accounts. Some say the risen Lord appeared in Galilee, some in Jerusalem. John's gospel we heard today describes an apparition-like figure coming through the locked doors to meet them. Mary met a man in a garden she thought was a gardener, and it turned out to be the risen Lord. Another group of disciples gathered around, eating fish around a campfire, and this mysterious Lord came and ate fish with them. Clearly, these accounts took shape over decades as they were told time and again, acquiring along the way elements of story and myth. Some scholars are inclined to write off much of what all the accounts of the resurrection proclaim. But there are many important historians, such as the Jewish scholar Pinchas Lapid, who argue confidently that by any acceptable historical criteria, one would have to trust these accounts to be reporting something that genuinely happened. Nevertheless, faith and doubt are woven through and through this Easter story. Faith is the capacity to trust what we cannot prove. And every act of faith entails risk. The same is true of believing. We think of believing as intellectual assent, analyzing a list of propositions and deciding whether we can agree with them or not. But theologian Marcus Borg argues that before the year 1600 or so, to believe didn't mean to affirm some statements to be true. The object of the verb believe was not an idea or statement, but a person. You would believe a person. To believe meant faithfulness, trust, allegiance, loyalty, and commitment, not declaring that you agree to some specifics. To believe meant to love. I've had conversations through the years with worshipers who are uncomfortable saying the creed in our services because they either don't understand what they're saying or they don't agree with some of it. They're not comfortable saying the words for themselves. But when we say we believe or I believe in the creeds, we are not signing on to a list of intellectual propositions about God and Christ. We're giving our assent, our trust to the creed as the great song of our faith, the core of what we as a people gather together, knowing that what we can or cannot believe will grow and shift over time. We have this great song to embrace us, this great declaration, and then we grow and learn and struggle and learn some more. We shouldn't forget that Jesus never required any set of beliefs from his disciples. He called them to follow, to trust him, to trust God, and knew that the rest of what they needed to know they would learn as they traveled along the way. Faith and doubt, questioning and risk are all part of the life of faith. I've always liked immensely poet Emily Dickinson's words, "We both believe and doubt 100 times an hour, which keeps believing nimble." And here's the heart of it. We actually need our doubts as part of our faith. Doubts enable us to grow, to learn more, to discover more of the truth of the world. Not to doubt is not to grow spiritually or intellectually. And one of the greatest dangers our world faces is dealing with groups that have no doubts, that do not allow questioning, that are certain that they are right in every way. The hope of the world lies with humble, exploring, seeking faiths, eager to know more, eager to plunge into their traditions to see new things, ready to discover fresh, new things. The fact is that if we proved that all historical evidence pointed to the resurrection having happened, it would still remain an event in the past, a victory over death accomplished at one time in one place. But as with Thomas, the issue runs deeper than that. Not did the risen Lord appear, but does the risen Lord appear? Will he show himself to you and me as he seems to have shown himself so long ago? I believe Thomas the doubter can guide us as we live between faith and doubt about this conviction at the center of our faith. When Thomas heard the news of the resurrection, he responded honestly with his doubts to his friends. That's an important place to start. The church is meant to be a community of searchers after truth, not a band of unthinking followers. This ought to be a place to ask questions, to wonder, to explore, to learn and go deeper, but to feel free to ask and explore in any direction that seems to beckon us in the search for truth. And what did Thomas do with his doubts and misgivings? He stayed with the Christian community he was a part of. He shared in their Eucharist. He prayed and lived and worked with them. And it was there in the midst of that community a week later, as they were breaking bread and sharing the wine of Eucharist, that the risen Lord appeared again, and Thomas saw him. It was in the context of his community of faith and traveling and exploring that the risen Lord could become real for him. Doubting Thomas, you remember, wanted tangible proof that the Lord was risen. Unless I see the mark of the nail in his hands and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. And when Jesus appeared again, he said to Thomas, "Put your fingers here." You see, the way to look for the risen Lord, it seems, is by touching his wounds, touching the hurting places in the world around us, touching the places where Christ most sought to be. And so, if we want to meet our risen Lord, he's shown us where we'll find him in our Eucharist, in our times of worship, in our life together, and especially in the wounded places where he always said he would be. I know I saw a glimpse of the risen Lord at work at this Bostonians for Youth dinner that was sponsored by so many people in our parish last week, when a young athletic student from a very broken, very troubled background put on a dazzling dance performance filled with grace and pride and joy. And you could tell there was some energy, some gift flowing through him. It looked for all the world like resurrection. And we heard a young woman, a high school senior, struggling to make her way through and move on to college, speak movingly of the difference that a Trinity parishioner made in her life by, yes, teaching her math, but really by giving her a remarkable experience of the love of Christ over many, many months that seemed to have made her a different person. And over the last 3 days, our Stations of the City pilgrims made their way on a Good Friday journey to the sites of pain here in our community, carrying Christ's cross the whole way, and found themselves drawn closer to the crucified as they were drawn closer to those whose lives were most in need. And Trinity parishioners have spent important parts of this bitter winter supporting the work of Boston Warm, the organization of churches responding to the crisis needs of the homeless in our city. When we see people in defiant joy, embracing and responding to the wounded of this world, when we find ourselves practicing resurrection by coming together in worship, by living our lives with one another, by sharing this journey together, by becoming servants and healers in this troubled world, then we can know for ourselves, beyond faith or doubt, that Christ the Lord is risen.